How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel here for some Week 15 fantasy football lineup advice. In this episode, I'll be breaking down 5 running backs that early in the week here, I like their outlooks and potential to be key lineup contributors for teams here in this very crucial and important slate of games. So as always, if you're watching us for the first time this season, make sure you head on down, smash that subscribe button, and turn the bell on so you're never late for a new piece of content. Kick back, relax, and enjoy here. Let's get moving and talk through how you can potentially win your league championships this season. All right, here we go. So we've got ourselves some exciting players in today's episode. I will quickly recap last week as we actually did our picks last week for the running back position. So we did somewhat of a hybrid style video where I did starts and sits in the same episode. We covered 7 names. We hit correctly on 5 of the 7, starting Ezekiel Elliott, sitting Devin Singletary, starting Cam Akers, starting Isiah Pacheco, and sitting Latavius Murray. Our 2 misses of the week, Jeff Wilson, who ended up getting injured. Usually I would disqualify that pick one way or another because of the injury. However, it was very clear that Raheem Mostert was the back to own for that game, so we're just tossing that out as the loss. And then DeAndre Swift was definitely a L for us last week. He was very underproductive. So starting out this week here, we're going back into the well with Isiah Pacheco, who has really established himself as a nice running back 2 here for fantasy football. Now, he had some puzzling usage this past week. It's actually kind of surprising given the role that Jerick McKinnon played last week, that Pacheco was able to still manage 93 yards from scrimmage and over 10 half PPR fantasy points. So again, a little bit puzzling considering the fact that Jerick McKinnon was such a star in the receiving game, having 2 touchdowns, having himself a really nice yardage total as well. But being the physical runner, the high motor player that Isiah Pacheco is, he goes out there and gets things done. He only had 16 opportunities, but in this week's matchup at Houston, I think if he gets just as much work in this game, he will have equal, if not greater success than he had here this past week against Denver. So I'm pretty bullish on this matchup here. Again, this is a very solid and strong top 24 play for me. I'm not looking at Pacheco as a guy that's going to win your week's matchup for you, but I do see him as a really safe floor bet here to go out there and get you some dependable and reliable production in this week's game against a lowly Texans team that I think will regress back to their average here and be the one-win team that they've been throughout this season, and not necessarily the world beaters that are running this quarterback by committee system with Jeff Driscoll and Davis Mills that gave the Cowboys a run for their money in week 14. Ezekiel Elliott, I'm going back to the well on him again this week. You're actually going to see some familiar faces in today's episode, but Zeke is someone that right now I really like the role that he has carved out in this offense. It isn't super inducive to having a high ceiling. Again, not someone that you should expect to win your weekly lineup matchup for you, but this is a guy that is dependable. I think that his weekly fantasy outlook here is very strong, and against a Jacksonville team that's allowed opponents to have over their average point per game total in most matchups this season, Ezekiel Elliott is someone that I think has a really strong opportunity to come out here and, again, be relied upon in Week 15. So for Zeke, it was this past week having the game-winning touchdown. He actually was relatively underproductive in terms of his overall efficiency and yardage output throughout most of that game. Again, we were expecting a Texans dramatic loss to the Cowboys here, not a dramatic come-from-behind win for Dallas here, but the frequent scoring opportunities, the frequency of Dallas getting into the red zone, particularly inside the 5-yard line, and using Ezekiel Elliott as that sledgehammer back has allowed him to maintain RB2 level status here throughout this season. Again, if we look at the 2 teams this week, I'm expecting the Dallas Cowboys to progress from where they're at last week. I think that something wasn't clicking. They weren't, well prepared, or whatever the case might have been. They didn't function at the highest level they're capable of. On the flip side here, the Jaguars are coming off of a hot game here, 3 games straight of Trevor Lawrence playing nearly flawless football, and there has to be a point where that regression comes. So against a tough Dallas defense here, I'm expecting that overall the Cowboys should come back with a stronger game, maybe force that Jags team to lower their level of play a little bit here, and then again, frequent scoring opportunities, goal line carries, and efficiency at the end of the day for Ezekiel Elliott, which is something that we haven't really talked about, but I think they found a perfect niche way to use both him and Tony Pollard cohesively here and promote fantasy success for each. Zeke, if you're worried about touch count, had 20 opportunities in week 14 on a 49% snap count percentage. So again, they seem to have figured out the best way to use both of these 2 players. Alvin Kamara here against Atlanta this week. You would think based on previous seasons that Alvin Kamara would be a set it and forget it type lineup option, but he has been dramatically underwhelming this season. He has not been the same fantasy player that we're accustomed to seeing, and a large majority of the problems have stemmed from the coaching staff and the overall execution of plays, personnel-wise, starting with the quarterback position as well, and that's trickled on downward, and that's affected guys, especially Alvin Kamara here, who we once viewed as a fantasy superstar. He was the 2020 running back one here. Of course, that seems like a very distant past. So for AK in this matchup, the reason that I like him here, both of these teams are coming off bye. Hopefully, just hopefully, the Saints offense can get a little bit healthier here. Their offensive line has been a little bit of a tricky, continual working progress type situation here. Trevor Penning, their mauler in the run game, the guy they drafted in the first round of this season, hasn't quite been able to get on, his feet and really have a strong rookie campaign. So maybe we'll see more of him. Maybe we can see some more dominance in this run game. But the key factors and components here, Atlanta is a defense allowing fantasy running backs to exceed their scoring average on a per-game basis this season. That's good news for Alvin Kamara. Additionally, Mark Ingram had the knee issue on Monday Night Football the week prior to the bye week here that they're coming off of in Week 14. Both Atlanta and the Saints had a bye here. So both are hopefully coming back into this game fresh, regardless of whatever fantasy player you have here. But Mark Ingram being gone opens up the door, obviously, for more opportunities, more carries, hopefully more receptions, something that's been really lacking from AK's arsenal this season. But at the end of the day here, you're betting on the talent, you're betting on the player, a slightly above average matchup, and hoping that gets the job done. Again, not looking to AK to win my matchup for me this week, but I am looking at him as a top 24 play, a guy that can be relied upon as this running back position group is pretty dang thin. Cam Akers, an interesting player here. So this is the first guy that we're going to talk through that, has the opportunity to have himself a really nice ceiling this week. Of course, the Rams' offensive floor, I was going to say their ceiling. Their ceiling is quite low as well. Cam Akers, though, I do think is the player that could potentially, not break out, but have a really nice game here. And obviously, the floor for Cam Akers, though, the situational implications haven't been great throughout this season. So what I see for Cam Akers in this matchup, coming off of a big win, obviously having the Baker Mayfield 98-yard comeback drive on Thursday night against the Raiders. They're on a long week here. They're playing the Packers coming off of a bye. Green Bay under Matt LaFleur has not been great coming off of bye weeks here. This has been a team that has traditionally disappointed in that game coming off of the rest week. And B, I talked about this last week. The reason we had Cam Akers as a must-start player is this team absolutely has to run the football. They may not be efficient. They may not be great at it, but they literally have to. You can't drop back with now Baker Mayfield, their starting quarterback, and ask him to throw the ball 40-plus times per game and expect good results. You don't have the offensive pass catchers, the weapons at his disposal to do that, and you just have to keep the defense balanced. With how bad this offensive line is, there has to be some sort of counterpunch, or in this case, possibly the core of the offense, because again, I don't expect this Rams team to come out here guns a-blazing and score a bunch of points, but what I do expect is that they will give a respectable amount of opportunities to Cam Akers, and against an interior defensive line here for Green Bay that has struggled throughout this season. They've allowed running backs to play very well against them. Akers is an explosive player. He sucks at breaking tackles. He's not the best guy, honestly, at finding the hole in the offensive blocking scheme. He frequently runs into the pile when he could potentially find something else, daylight, green grass elsewhere. But if he can spring a big run here, if he can score a touchdown like he did last week, there is some nice ceiling potential at play, an opportunity for you guys to capitalize on what could be a really sneaky start here in Week 15, the Round 1 playoff games, of course. And then finally, Travis Etienne here against the Dallas Cowboys. You would think that Travis Etienne, after his mid-season stretch, would be a set-it-and-forget-it type option in your lineups. However, if you go back and look at the numbers here, for the better part of the last month, he has absolutely sucked. He has stunk up the show, and if you go back his last 4 contests, he has not scored 10 or more fantasy points since he had a great game in Week 9 against the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, 0 double-digit point production games in his last month of action here, which includes a bye week. So technically, it's been longer than that. So very, very poor stuff. He has, again, sucked every week, Week 10 and onward at Kansas City, that last game. One more time for you, Week 9 against the Las Vegas Raiders. So with all of that negativity in the air now, Why do I believe in Travis Etienne for this week? Why would I continue to put him in my lineup as a running back 2? Well, this is a player that I still believe has incredible upside here. In this matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, do not let the face value number of the Dallas Cowboys being relatively stingy in terms of allowing fantasy points per game to opposing running backs scare you off here. I believe, and after watching these games for weeks on end here, the only way that teams can hang in the game against Dallas is to run the football, especially teams that, of course, aren't completely buttoned up and a clean football team, or at least on par with the level of team that the Dallas Cowboys are, which, although they're hot right now, although their quarterback's playing at a high level, and Trevor Lawrence, I still believe that applies, this philosophy applies to this team here. The teams that have run the ball against Dallas have had somewhat moderate to, maybe even good levels of offensive success. Look back just this past week. The Houston Texans were the most recent team to do it here, running Dameon Pierce 22 times for 78 yards and a touchdown. It's not the most efficient. It's not the most pretty thing in the world. But if you sit back and pass the football a high volume of times, do not be surprised if Trevor Lawrence gets under siege by Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, and the whole rest of that crew there, and they go absolutely bananas on this Jaguars football team. So for me, this team has to establish an offensive identity of running the football in this game. Otherwise, they're going to get smoked. Second of all here, Travis Etienne has an absurd ceiling. I believe I mentioned this already at some point throughout this take here, but between his pass-catching skill set, between his open field explosiveness, and overall the fact that he still last week had a 75% snap count percentage, had 17 rushing attempts with just 32 yards, averaging 1.88 yards per carry, things have got to get at least a little bit better here. So again, the floor in this matchup may not be the best, but I do believe that his superlative abilities in terms of just being an extremely talented player, a dynamic athlete for this team, it could come out here and he might show himself out of the woodwork and pop onto your lineups in the stretch of games when you need him the most, starting it out here with this playoff run against the Dallas Cowboys. So there you guys have it. To recap, we're starting Pacheco at Houston this week, Alvin Kamara against Atlanta, Cam Akers at Green Bay, Ezekiel Elliott at Jacksonville, and Travis Etienne on the other side of that matchup at home against Dallas. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to smash that like button. Let YouTube know you enjoyed this video so other players out there can find it and use it to their benefit this week. And as always, if you're new around here as well, click that subscribe button. It helps us out a lot here, helps grow the channel. We've also got our start episode out for the wide receiver position this week. If you have not checked that out, it means a lot to me if you go look at that here after we finish up today. And with that being said, that should do it. So I'll see you in that wide receiver episode, and we'll see you there. Peace out.